The boy was crying in the dust when she found him, his small voice breaking like a cracked fiddle string under the merciless sun. Mara Keene, 30 years old and worn thin by hunger and hard years on the streets of Dodge, froze at the sound. She had been searching for scraps behind the livery when the whimper carried to her ear soft, frightened and out of place in a town that had no pity for weakness. Dodge was loud that morning, wagons creaking over ruts, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer striking hot iron, the laughter of drunken cowhands spilling from the saloon, though it wasn't yet noon. But that sound, thin and fragile, like a sparrow caught under boot, did not belong here. Her heart jumped. Mara had lived long enough on the streets to know when trouble was brewing, and anything that sounded like a child in this town was trouble. She moved carefully, her boots crunching over gravel, until she reached a half-rotted tarp leaning against the fence. She pulled it aside and gasped. There he was, a boy no older than 6. His dark hair was tangled, his face streaked with dust and dried tears. He crouched in the dirt like a stray dog, clutching a small beaded pouch to his chest as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. His lips trembled, whispering words in a language she didn't understand, words that carried the cadence of prayers. Mara's breath caught in her throat. She recognized him immediately, Apache. Every muscle in her body went stiff. She knew what this meant. If the wrong person saw him, his fate would be sealed. The town didn't take kindly to savages, especially not now, not after the raids rumored along the cattle trails. Men were already on edge, hands itching toward rifles and revolvers at the faintest excuse. To find an Apache child hidden in Dodge? They'd hang him in the street or worse, use him to send a message. The boy's eyes flicked up at her, wide and black as polished obsidian. He looked at her not with defiance, not with anger, but with a raw, desperate plea. Something inside Mara cracked. She remembered, unbidden, her own childhood. Not much remained of it now but flashes. Her mother's shawl wrapped around her shoulders on a winter night, the smell of corn cakes frying in a pan, the moment all of it was stolen when fever swept through their home. Mara had been 10 then, left alone to stumble into the streets with nothing but hunger gnawing her belly. She had begged, stolen, bartered her dignity for survival. And all the while, no one had looked at her with the kind of desperate hope this boy now poured into her. Her voice came rough, almost breaking. "Don't cry, boy. I've got you." But even as she whispered it, the ground seemed to tremble with the danger of her words. The boy swallowed and whispered back, his voice rasping like wind through dry grass. Naten. His name. The syllables hung heavy between them, and Mara felt the weight of a choice pressing on her chest like a millstone. She could turn away. No one would know she'd seen him. She could let Dodge chew him up, spit him out, and move on. That was the way of the world. That was how she had survived this long. But something inside her refused. Maybe it was because she had lost too much herself. Maybe because she was tired of walking past the broken and pretending she didn't see. Or maybe because, for the first time in years, someone needed her. She knelt down in the dirt, ignoring how the dust clung to her torn skirt, how the sharp gravel bit into her knees. She reached out slowly, careful not to frighten him. "Natan," she repeated, tasting the name on her tongue, offering it back like a promise. The boy blinked, then nodded once. Fierce for such a small child. A shout rang out from the main street, a man calling to another, laughter following like a whip crack. Mara flinched. If they came around the corner, if they found him here, her stomach knotted. She glanced around quickly. Behind the livery was no place for a child to hide. She had to move him, and fast. Her mind raced. There were places she could take him, old sheds no one bothered with, an abandoned shack by the creek, but none of them were safe if the town got wind of this. And sooner or later, someone would. Still, when she looked back at Natan, clutching that pouch as if it contained his soul, Mara knew her decision was already made. She extended her hand. "Come with me." For a moment he hesitated, his small chest rising and falling like a rabbit caught in a snare. Then, with trembling fingers, he reached for her, and in that touch, rough with dust yet soft with trust, Mara felt her fate change. She was no longer a starving woman scavenging for scraps. She was the shield between this child and a world that wanted him. Gone. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that returning Natan to his people would set in motion events that would shake the frontier and change her life forever. Mara led Natan through the narrow back lane, her pulse hammering in her ears like hoofbeats on hard ground. The child's hand was small and trembling in hers, his skin warm despite the cool beaded pouch pressed against his chest. Every time his bare feet scuffed the dirt, Mara winced, afraid the sound would carry. The town was waking in full force now. Wagons rattled over rutted streets, boots stomped along the wooden walkways, and voices rose and fell, traders arguing, horses snorting, women calling to their children. Mara knew she had no time. Any set of eyes catching sight of Natan would spell disaster. She ducked into the shadows, between two leaning buildings where the air smelled of sour beer and rotting hay. "Stay close," she whispered, pointing toward a broken-down stable at the edge of town. The place had been abandoned since winter, when its owner froze to death in a snowstorm. No one went near it anymore. That made it dangerous, but also the only chance she had. Natan said nothing, but his dark eyes followed hers, alert and sharp. For someone so young, he carried himself like a survivor. Mara felt a pang in her chest. He deserved to be out on the open land with his people, not trapped in this town that hated the sight of him. They slipped through the warped door of the stable, its hinges groaning in protest. Dust swirled in the slanting light. Broken stalls lined the walls, and a collapsed hayloft sagged above. It smelled of mouse nests and old straw, but at least it was hidden. "Here," Mara said, kneeling and brushing hay aside to make a crude bed. "You rest here. Keep quiet no matter what you hear." Natan hugged his pouch tighter, watching her warily. Then, slowly, he crawled into the nest of straw, curling up small like a fawn hiding in tall grass. Mara sat back on her heels, her stomach twisting. She had to think ahead: food, water, and how to keep the boy out of sight. She was no stranger to hunger, but feeding 2 mouths on nothing was near impossible. Still, she couldn't let him starve. A sudden crash outside made her freeze. Male laughter followed close, too close. She hurried to the crack in the stable wall and peered out. 2 ranch hands swaggered past, rifles slung over their shoulders, their voices thick with whiskey. "Damn Apaches took 4 head of cattle last week," one spat. "Sheriff says if he finds one near town, he'll string him up and let the crows pick his bones." The other chuckled darkly. "Wouldn't mind seeing that. Teach the devils to keep clear." Mara pressed her fist to her mouth, swallowing her panic. She looked back at Natan. He sat motionless in the straw, his tiny body rigid, his black eyes fixed on her. He didn't need to understand their words. The hate in their voices was enough. When the men's footsteps faded, Mara crossed the room and knelt beside him. "Don't be afraid," she whispered, though her own fear gnawed at her like rats in the walls. "I won't let them find you." He blinked at her, then lifted the beaded pouch and pressed it into her hands. Mara startled at the gesture. The leather was soft and worn smooth, the beadwork intricate, red, turquoise, and white in patterns she didn't understand. It smelled faintly of smoke and pine. She looked at him, puzzled. "This is yours." Natan shook his head, pressing her fingers closed around it. His lips moved. "Mother." The word was broken, accented, but clear enough. Mara's throat tightened. The pouch wasn't just a trinket, it was his mother's, maybe the last thing he had left of her. And now he was trusting Mara with it. She closed her fist around it, feeling the beads bite into her palm. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. The boy nodded once and curled back into the straw. As if that small act of trust had given him enough peace to close his eyes, Mara sat back, staring at the shaft of sunlight cutting across the floor. Outside, the town bustled with its usual cruelty, blind to the life hidden just beyond its streets. But inside this broken stable, she had made a vow. She would keep Natan alive, no matter the cost. What she didn't know was that the walls were thinner than she thought, and soon, someone else in Dodge would catch wind of her secret. The stable creaked like an old ship in the wind, every sound loud enough to set Mara's nerves on edge. She had spent the last day slipping scraps of bread and water to Natan, always careful, always watching the street before ducking inside. The boy hardly spoke, but his black eyes tracked her every move. There was something unnerving about the way he watched, quiet, sharp, as though weighing her against the world outside. On the second night, a storm rolled through Dodge. Rain drummed on the roof, dripping through broken shingles, soaking the hay. Thunder rattled the walls, and Natan pressed close to her side, flinching at each crash. Mara wrapped her arms around him, rocking gently. "Hush now," she whispered, though her own chest ached with fear. "It'll pass. Storms always do." By morning, the air smelled of wet earth and smoke. Dodge was restless men gathering in knots outside the saloon, voices sharp and angry. Mara kept her head down as she slipped through the muddy street. Hunger clawed at her belly, but she forced herself toward the bakery, hoping for scraps. She nearly bumped into Mrs. Halpern, a broad-shouldered woman with a hawk's eye for gossip. "Well, if it ain't Mara Keene," she sneered, her gaze raking Mara's thin frame. "Haven't seen you begging much lately. You got yourself a secret, girl?" Mara forced a weak smile. "Just been keeping to myself." Mrs. Halpern narrowed her eyes. "Funny. Folks say they've seen you slipping around the edge of town. Ducking into that old stable. What you hiding out there?" Ice slid down Mara's spine. She forced a laugh. "Only thing hiding in is rats." Mrs. Halpern sniffed, unconvinced, but the bell over the bakery door rang and pulled her attention. Mara used the chance to slip away, clutching a crust of bread she'd bartered for with the last of her coins. When she returned to the stable, Natan was waiting, perched like a sparrow on the hay. His sharp ears must have heard her steps before she entered. She handed him the bread, watching as he tore into it with a ferocity that made her heart clench. "You've got to be quieter," she murmured. "The town's sniffing around. If they find you—" She stopped herself, unwilling to paint the horror of what might happen. Natan looked up, crumbs clinging to his lips. For the first time, he spoke more than a word. "You afraid?" The words were halting, accented, but clear. Mara swallowed. "Yes, but I'm more afraid of what happens if I do nothing." Natan tilted his head as though puzzling her out. Then, with the solemnity of a grown man, he whispered, "Strong." The word landed heavy. She didn't feel strong. She felt like a brittle stick in a storm. But in his eyes, maybe she was something else. That night, her fears sharpened. As she left the stable, a shadow moved at the corner of the alley. Sheriff Danner leaned against a post, chewing on a toothpick, eyes glinting under his hat brim. "Mara," he drawled, voice oily. "You been busy. Folks are talking. Care to tell me why you spend so much time in that broken barn?" Her throat dried. "It's dry in there. Better than the street when it rains." The sheriff studied her, silent long enough to make her squirm. Then he spat his toothpick into the mud and smiled slow and cold. "Best hope you're telling the truth, 'cause if I find you keeping something from this town, I won't be merciful." He tipped his hat and strolled away. But the warning hung heavier than the storm clouds. Mara slipped back into the stable, her hands shaking. Natan looked up at her, sensing the fear she couldn't hide. She crouched beside him, clutching the beaded pouch he had given her. "They're watching us," she whispered. "But I won't let them take you. Do you hear me? Not ever." Natan reached out, laying his small hand over hers. His touch was warm, steady, unafraid. Somehow, it gave her the strength to steady her breath. But as the night deepened, she couldn't shake the feeling that Dodge itself was closing in, that sooner or later someone would force open the stable door, and when that happened, she would have to choose between her life and his. Mara woke before dawn, her body aching from another night spent curled on the stable floor. The faint light of morning filtered through the gaps in the boards, painting pale stripes across Natan's sleeping face. He lay nestled in straw, his small chest rising and falling steadily, one hand still clutching the edge of her skirt even in sleep. For a moment, she allowed herself to watch him in peace. The boy looked softer like this, less like the wary fugitive she had rescued, more like any child who should have been safe in his mother's arms. But that illusion shattered quickly. Outside, the town was already stirring, and danger beat on the walls like the morning wind. Mara slipped outside, careful to leave the boy hidden. She needed water. She filled a tin cup at the trough behind the livery, all the while keeping her eyes low. The sheriff's warning echoed in her head. Someone would be watching. She could feel it. On her way back, she nearly collided with Jeb Crowley, a wiry ranch hand known for his cruelty when whiskey loosened his tongue. His eyes narrowed. "Well, look who crawled out early. You've been sniffing around that stable a lot, Mara. What's in there? You finally get yourself a man?" Mara forced a laugh, though her stomach twisted. "Only rats, Jeb, but maybe they're better company than most folks in Dodge." Jeb smirked, but his gaze lingered too long. Mara hurried past, heart pounding. She didn't breathe until the stable door shut behind her. Natan stirred as she entered. His black eyes found hers instantly, sharp and unblinking. She handed him the tin cup, watching him drink greedily, water dripping down his chin. "Quiet today?" she whispered, brushing the hair back from his face. "We need to stay quiet." But fate had other plans. By noon, heavy boots crunched outside the stable. Mara froze, every muscle locking tight. A shadow fell across the doorway, and before she could move, the door creaked open. Sheriff Danner stood there, broad shoulders filling the frame, his revolver slung low at his hip. Behind him, Jeb Crowley lingered with a grin that made Mara's skin crawl. "Well now," the sheriff drawled, his eyes scanning the dark interior. "You got a fondness for abandoned barns, Mara. Mind if we take a look around?" Her pulse roared in her ears. She positioned herself in front of the haystack where Natan lay hidden, forcing her voice steady. "Ain't much to see. Just shelter when the rain comes." Danner's eyes narrowed. He stepped inside, boots grinding on the dirt. "Folks say different. Say you've been sneaking food in here. Care to explain that?" Mara's throat went dry. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "I eat where I can. Maybe I don't want half the town watching me chew." Jeb chuckled behind the sheriff. "Maybe she's keeping a little prize tucked away." His eyes flicked toward the hay. "Could be something worth selling." The sheriff silenced him with a glance, then turned his attention back to Mara. He took a slow step forward, close enough that she caught the smell of tobacco on his breath. "I'll tell you plain, Mara, if you're hiding something, and I find it, you won't be walking away. You understand?" Mara forced herself not to flinch, not to glance toward the boy. Her voice came out hoarse but firm. "There's nothing here but me." The sheriff studied her for a long, unbearable moment. Then he spat into the dirt and turned. "Come on, Jeb, nothing but rats." They left, the door banging shut behind them. Mara sagged against the wall, her legs trembling. Behind her, Natan crawled out of the straw, his face pale, lips pressed tight. He had heard every word. Mara dropped to her knees, pulling him close. His body was stiff, like a coiled spring, but after a moment he buried his face against her shoulder. She stroked his hair, her own heart still racing. "They won't take you," she whispered fiercely. "Not while I'm still breathing." But even as she spoke, she knew Dodge was closing in. The sheriff would not let this go. The next time he came, he wouldn't leave empty-handed. If she wanted to keep Natan safe, she would have to move him farther than the edges of town, out into the wilderness, toward the unknown, toward his people. And though fear gripped her, a strange fire burned beneath it. For the first time in years, Mara Keene had a purpose, and she would fight tooth and nail to see it through. The canyon air grew colder as the night deepened, and Evelyn pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. She hadn't expected the wilderness to feel so vast, so silent, now that the echo of hooves had died away into the rocky passage behind them. Every sound seemed magnified, the soft snort of Tala's horse, the creak of worn leather, the faint rustle of a night breeze carrying sage and dust. The boy, nestled against Tala's broad chest, stirred in his sleep, his small fingers clutching the strands of Tala's long hair like he was clinging to a lifeline. Evelyn watched the way Tala steadied him, a tenderness in the warrior's touch that surprised her. For a man who looked carved from stone, shirtless and adorned with bone and turquoise beads that glimmered in the moonlight, his gentleness was almost disarming. "Why bring me?" Evelyn asked finally, her voice quieter than she intended, as if the canyon itself might be listening. "The boy is safe with you now. I've done my part." Tala turned his head slightly, his sharp profile outlined by the silver glow of the rising moon. His dark eyes settled on her, and though his face was unreadable, his words carried weight. "You carried what was not yours," he said. "You gave him water, warmth, and risked your life on the streets for him. That ties you to him. That ties you to me." The statement struck her harder than she expected. Evelyn shifted in her saddle, feeling both unsettled and oddly grounded by his certainty. For years, she had drifted like tumbleweed through towns that never wanted her, a woman with no kin, no name worth remembering. Yet here was this man of another world declaring she was bound to someone. Before she could respond, Tala lifted a hand, signaling silence. Evelyn froze, her ears straining. A faint echo reached them, carried by the canyon walls. Distant riders. Her pulse quickened. "Are they yours?" "No." His reply was sharp, final. The boy stirred again, whimpering, sensing the tension. Tala shifted him gently, then leaned closer to Evelyn. "Stay close. If they find us, they will not ask questions." The urgency in his tone sent a shiver through her. She gripped her reins tighter, following him as he urged his horse off the narrow trail and into a shallow ravine choked with brush. The moonlight barely filtered through, shadows swallowing them whole. Evelyn's heart pounded so loudly she swore the riders could hear it echo off the canyon walls. Minutes stretched like hours until the sound of hooves grew nearer, then fainter, fading into the distance. Still, Tala didn't move. He sat motionless, the boy pressed against him, every line of his body taut like a drawn bow. Finally, when silence returned, Evelyn exhaled. "Who were they?" "Men who trade lives for coin," Tala said. His voice was low, almost bitter. "They hunt children, women, anyone they can sell. They would have taken him from you. They would take you too." The words sank into her like a blade. For the first time, she understood just how precarious her act of kindness had been. Returning the boy wasn't only about honor, it was about survival. When they finally emerged from the ravine, The moon hung high, bathing the desert floor in silver. They pressed on, guided by Tala's sure sense of direction. The land itself seemed to obey him. Where Evelyn saw endless rock and dust, he saw paths, water, shelter dot by dawn. They reached a hidden hollow where a trickling stream cut through the stone. Tala dismounted with the boy, laying him gently on a bed of woven grasses already waiting proof this place had been prepared. Evelyn slid off her horse, her legs trembling with fatigue, her body aching from the long ride. She bent down beside the boy, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. For the first time since finding him, he looked peaceful, his tiny chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Tala crouched nearby, his muscles catching the first light of day, his long hair falling like a curtain across his shoulders. He looked at Evelyn, not with suspicion now, but with something quieter, an acknowledgement. "You could have left him to die," he said. "But you carried him, even when the world turned its back on you." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I didn't think, I just couldn't let him go." Tala's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't sternness either. "Then perhaps, Evelyn, the world has been wrong about you." For the first time in years, Evelyn felt the stirrings of something she hadn't dared let herself believe in belonging. By mid-morning, the desert sun had turned harsh, beating down against the canyon's stone walls until the air shimmered like glass. Evelyn shaded her eyes, though it did little to ease the sting. She was exhausted, her body sore from riding, her throat dry as sand. Still, she pressed forward, keeping Tala's horse in sight. Tala rode at a steady, almost effortless pace, the boy secure in one arm as though he were part of him. The child had barely stirred since dawn, his tiny frame wrapped in Tala's blanket, safe against the warrior's chest. Evelyn couldn't help but watch the way Tala carried him like he was more precious than gold, more fragile than glass dot. Finally, they stopped at a patch of mesquite near a bend in the canyon where a trickle of water seeped through the stone. Tala dismounted with the boy and gestured for Evelyn to join him. "You must drink," he said simply. Evelyn slid from her horse, stumbling a little before finding her footing. She knelt at the water, scooping the cool stream into her hands. The first sip nearly brought tears to her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to quiet the burning in her throat. Tala set the boy gently on the ground, letting him rest in the shade. Evelyn crouched nearby, brushing dust from the child's cheek. He looked peaceful now, the lines of worry smoothed from his young face. "Does he have a name?" she asked softly. Tala's dark eyes flicked to her. "Koa," he said. "It means strong." Evelyn repeated the name quietly, as if testing the weight of it. "Koa." Something shifted in Tala's expression. His gaze lingered on her longer than before, and for a moment she thought she saw the faintest glimmer of approval. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. He rose to his feet, scanning the horizon. "We cannot stay long. Those men will circle back." The reminder tightened Evelyn's chest. She glanced at Koa, then back to Tala. "If they're after him, they won't stop, will they?" "No." His voice was firm, final. "They trade lives as others trade cattle. But they will not take him. Not while I breathe." The conviction in his tone sent a shiver through her. She studied him as he stood in the sunlight, his muscular frame bronzed by the desert heat, long black hair falling loose against his shoulders, turquoise beads catching flashes of light. He looked like a figure carved from the land itself, unyielding, fierce, untamed. And yet, beneath all that strength, he carried a child with a tenderness she hadn't expected. Before she could speak, a sharp crack echoed across the canyon gunfire. Evelyn's head jerked up. "They found us?" Tala didn't flinch. His hand went instinctively to the tomahawk at his side, his other arm pulling Koa protectively against him. "Not yet," he said. "But they are close." Her pulse hammered in her ears. Memories of the streets came flooding back, men chasing her, corners where she had no escape. Fear had been her shadow for years, but now it was different. She wasn't alone. And for the first time, someone else was ready to fight for her. Tala turned to her. Ride with me. Stay close. Do not fall behind. She nodded, swallowing the knot of fear in her throat. They mounted quickly, the boy secure in Tala's arm, Evelyn riding so near that she could hear the steady rhythm of his horse's hooves. The canyon walls narrowed, twisting into a passage so tight the sunlight barely broke through. Every echo of their movement seemed magnified, bouncing off the stone until it felt like the world itself was watching them. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Evelyn's breath caught. She glanced over her shoulder and saw dust rising in the distance. Riders coming fast. Tala urged his horse faster, his jaw tight, eyes burning with focus. Evelyn pushed her tired mount to keep up, the wind tearing at her hair as the canyon rushed past in a blur of red and gold stone. Suddenly Tala veered left, guiding them into a hidden gap between boulders. The path narrowed to nothing more than a shadowy cleft, invisible unless you knew it was there. They plunged into darkness, the sound of pursuit muffled by stone. When they emerged on the other side, the desert opened wide, vast and endless beneath the sun. No riders in sight. For now they were safe. Evelyn gasped for breath, her whole body trembling. Tala slowed his horse. Koa still clutched against him, unharmed. His calmness in the storm unsettled her as much as it steadied her. Finally, he looked at her. "You are not weak," he said simply. She blinked, startled. "What?" "You have walked with hunger, with cold, with men who would take your life, and still you carried Koa. Many would not. But you did." The words struck deep, like a spark in dry timber. For years, Evelyn had been nothing. Just another shadow on the streets, another unwanted mouth. Yet here, in the eyes of this man, she was something else. She straightened in her saddle, her voice firmer than before. "Then I'll keep carrying him. As long as I have to." For the first time, Tala allowed the faintest curve of a smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Evelyn believe she was no longer drifting. She was part of something larger, something worth fighting for. By the time the sun began its slow descent, staining the horizon in deep shades of crimson and gold, Evelyn felt as though every bone in her body had been rattled loose. They had ridden hard for hours, the canyon walls finally giving way to open plains. The land stretched endlessly, dotted with sagebrush and distant ridges that shimmered in the heat haze. Tala slowed his horse, raising a hand for her to do the same. Evelyn pulled her mount alongside him, her chest heaving with exhaustion. Koa stirred in Tala's arms, his small face lifting toward the dying light of day. Evelyn followed Tala's gaze and felt her breath catch. On the ridge ahead, silhouetted against the fiery sky, figures on horseback appeared one by one, first 2, then 5, then a dozen. Warriors, Apache. Their lances and rifles caught the light, their silhouettes sharp and unyielding. Her throat tightened. "Your people?" she whispered. Tala's expression softened, pride glimmering in his dark eyes. "Yes, we are home." Relief crashed through her, so overwhelming she had to grip the saddle horn to steady herself. The chase, the fear, the endless running, all of it seemed to dissolve under the weight of that word. Home. As they drew closer, the riders descended the ridge in perfect rhythm, the thunder of hooves shaking the ground. Evelyn's instinct was to shrink back, to brace for rejection. She had lived her whole life being cast aside, told she didn't belong. What would they see in her, a ragged street woman with nothing but scars and hunger? But the moment the warriors saw Tala with the child in his arms, their cries broke through the air, a sound of joy, of homecoming. They rode forward with raised hands, their faces fierce with relief. Evelyn watched as Tala dismounted, lowering Koa carefully into the arms of an elder woman who rushed forward. Tears streaked down the woman's weathered face as she clutched the boy to her chest, murmuring his name over and over. Koa blinked up at her, then smiled faintly, as if some memory of her touch lingered in his young heart. Evelyn swallowed hard, her own chest tight with unexpected emotion. She had carried him across dust and danger, through hunger and fear. Now he was safe. Now he was where he belonged. But what of her? She dismounted slowly, brushing dust from her worn dress. The Apache gathered around Tala, their voices low but full of reverence. He had brought the boy back. He had fulfilled something greater than any one of them. Evelyn hung back, feeling invisible, like a shadow at the edge of someone else's story. Then Tala turned. His eyes found her through the crowd, and in that moment it was as if the noise fell away. He stepped toward her, his long hair loose around his bare shoulders, the tribal jewelry at his chest catching the last light of the sun. "This woman carried Koa when none else would," he said in a voice that carried across the gathering. When the world turned its back on her, she did not turn her back on him. She walked through hunger and danger to bring him home. Without her, this boy would not breathe among us today. The Apache murmured, their gazes shifting to her not with suspicion, but with something she had never known from strangers, respect. Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to protest that she was nothing, that she had only done what any human heart should have done. But the words tangled in her chest. An elder stepped forward, her lined face kind yet commanding. "You are welcome here," she said simply. Evelyn's vision blurred. No town had ever wanted her. No family had ever claimed her. Yet here, among people she had never known, she was being offered something she had always believed was out of reach. Belonging. Tala closed the distance between them. His voice lowered so only she could hear. "You thought yourself nothing. But in saving him, you saved yourself too." Her lips parted, but no reply came. Instead, she let the weight of his words settle into her bones. For the first time, she wasn't drifting. She wasn't forgotten. As night fell, a fire was lit in the center of the encampment. Food was shared, songs lifted into the air, the stars wheeling bright above them. Evelyn sat among them, the warmth of the flames on her face, the laughter of children echoing in her ears. And for the first time since she could remember, Evelyn didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She was part of something. She was home.